Friday, and with us this morning, senior writer at the Dispatch, columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, David Drucker, politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin, and presidential historian and Pulitzer Prize-winning author Jon Meacham. A great group assembled with a busy morning as Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche is now serving as acting Attorney General after the president yesterday fired Pam Bondi. Her removal as the country's top prosecutor comes after criticism of her leadership at the Justice Department and its handling in particular of the Epstein files. The Wall Street Journal reports the president fired Bondi Wednesday morning while the two were in the presidential limousine on the way to the Supreme Court. Bondi told an associate Trump said to her, quote, "I think it's time." She reportedly asked if she could keep her job until the summer, but the president declined. Trump had already decided earlier in the week that he would replace her. The Journal first reported in January the president had been increasingly unhappy with Bondi for failing to successfully prosecute his perceived political enemies and over her handling of the Epstein files release. Bondi expected to officially leave the Justice Department in about a month, according to the Journal. So, Jonathan Martin, this had been sort of whispered for several weeks now.
Yeah.
President Trump didn't think that Pam Bondi had gone far enough in effectively being his right arm at the Justice Department, going after perceived political enemies. And when she did, they failed in those attempts. And also, it's interesting when he talks about her being fired over the release of the Epstein files. Perhaps he's upset that she didn't protect him well enough. The fact that his name is all over those files. So how in the end did this come to be?
I think he just nailed it. I mean, I think it's the combination of the Epstein files and the fact that it was sort of seen as, in his eyes, something that was damaging to him, that was dragging out for a period of months, that was creating a constant, relentless storm that wasn't going away, basically unlike any other story that he's faced since he came back to the presidency, Willie. And I think the other issue was very straightforward. His view of DOJ is that it is a political arm for him to exact revenge on his political foes. It's not more complicated than that. And she couldn't secure indictments on Tish James, on James Comey, and on Adam Schiff. And those were sort of the three folks he was really eager to go after and get revenge on, and she couldn't deliver indictments. Now, we know why she couldn't deliver indictments, because grand juries couldn't get it done because there was no obvious charges against any of those three individuals to deliver. But that's really it. The Epstein thing was a mess, and she couldn't get the revenge that he craved. Willie, the larger context is he's got two cabinet secretaries here at DHS and DOJ, two of the most significant posts in the federal government, and neither appointee lasted 14 months. So for all this talk about, well, Trump, too, doesn't want turnover, he doesn't want a lot sort of bad process stories, he just pushed out two of his top cabinet officials after less than 14 months in office.
And now Todd Blanche, actually his personal attorney, is the acting attorney general. If Pam Bondi didn't go far enough, despite her fealty to Donald Trump, I guess he hopes his personal lawyer will. The Wall Street Journal editorial board's writing this morning a new piece titled, "Pam Bondi Gets Trumped as Attorney General." The Journal writes this: "Is there a worse job in Washington, D.C. than Attorney General under President Trump? We can't think of many. Ms. Bondi won't go down as a great AG, but we wonder if anyone could succeed given Mr. Trump's expectations for the job. The president wants someone who will do his bidding, which is proper on policy issues. The problem is he also wants an AG who will indict his political enemies and stretch the limits of the law to serve his political goals. This is a losing proposition. Ms. Bondi's great fault is that she was never good at saying no. A good AG owes the president his best independent legal advice, even if it's something the boss doesn't want to hear. The president's use of lawfare to repay his enemies will backfire on him, as it did on Democrats in 2024. He needs an AG willing to tell him when his demands cross a legal line." And Joe, it's not clear that Todd Blanche or some of the other names that we're talking about or hearing could be the next attorney general will do that whatsoever in terms of pushing back against Donald Trump. But again, Pam Bondi did her best to be the right arm of Donald Trump at the Justice Department. We remember the hearing that was supposed to be over the Epstein files, where she started talking about the Dow Jones crossing 50, that she had Oppo research on every Democrat asking a question, fumbled the Epstein files from the beginning. But in the end, she wasn't able to go as far on personal matters for Donald Trump as he wanted her to.
Right, and we remember it was maybe back in September of last year where the president frantically sent a direct message, what he thought was a direct message on Truth Social to Pam Bondi, when in fact it was read by the entire world, where he said, quick, hurry up, time's running out, and then suggested she start prosecuting his political enemies. John Meacham, that would have been a great time for her to actually take a stand against Donald Trump. I've known him for a long time, and I've explained to House speakers, I've explained to incoming agency heads, I've explained to anybody who asks me. Listen, being a sycophant doesn't work. At the end, if you're a sycophant, you end up just like every other sycophant that's come in and gone out of that office. You get fired, you get humiliated, you get thrown under the bus. At some point, maybe somebody will try standing up to him and getting fired for that reason. But it seems to me, John, and this is obvious, but what America needs, what this constitutional republic needs, and in fact, what the president needs is somebody who will tell him the truth. Much better to be fired for being a truth teller than being fired by being a sycophant who can't prosecute political enemies because the court's just not going to allow her or any other attorney general to do that.
God willing, and judges and grand juries willing. I think this is a somewhat complicated moment, right? Because politics, as everybody here knows as well or better than I do, is a human matter of incentive, right? And so what is the incentive for an attorney general under President Trump? The incentive is, as it seems to be with everyone there, is that you're for really the first time in American history, and I say that advisedly, you're really working in a court, a king's court, more than an administration. So that's the first thing. Even Edmund Randolph and Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, that was a different thing, right? That was a cabinet all the way through. This is different. And so you have this attorney general who is been removed for, in a way, doing the right thing. So what's the lesson? The lesson is, don't do the right thing if you want to keep your job in this particular cabinet. Now, I agree with you, Joe. This never ends well, working for President Trump. And the way I would try to think of it, if I were in the arena, is, look, do you want to be Joe McCarthy or do you want to be Margaret Chase Smith? Do you want to be Elliot Richardson or do you want to be Robert Bork to go to the Saturday Night Massacre? Take a stand, because the stand you take that is in keeping with the law, in keeping with tradition, is going to stand you in better historical stead than following the whims of a given person. And I hope the successor takes that incentive as opposed to the let's please the king no matter what incentive.
Well, yeah, and being a sycophant obviously has done none of these cabinet members who got fired and humiliated and kicked to the curb. It's done none of them any good. David Drucker, in Pam Bondi's case, she was, as the Washington Post said, she was a sycophant from day one, giving just over-the-top, flowery praise of Donald Trump, having that performance in the Judiciary Committee that was cringeworthy even for Republican members of the House and Senate. But you go through and, yes, a lot of this had to do with Donald Trump, just based on what we've heard, being angry. I suspect also coming after the Supreme Court hearing and just a spate of federal judges ruling against him. It seems like they're 3, 4, 5 a day on, stopping some of his zaniest ideas. That certainly may have been one of the reasons for this timing, but Pam Bondi also did other things that, offended the base. I've got the files on my desk. And then when the Epstein files are finally released, she doesn't release enough to please the MAGA base, and she releases too much for the Republican president, right? So she gets it both ways. And then finally, all of these lawfare episodes, just the most preposterous charges, so preposterous that you not only have courts stopping it, you have grand juries doing something grand juries hardly ever do, and refusing to indict. So, yeah, a lot of things were out of her hands and her control, but certainly she didn't make things easier on herself from day one.
No, she didn't. And, you could see with all of these cabinet members, maybe not all of them, but most of them, right? There's the job they're trying to do day to day in their agencies, and then they're also trying to manage the president. They're trying to manage him internally. They're trying to manage him publicly. We often talk about these hearings where cabinet officials like Bondi appeared, and it's an audience of one, right? It's all about managing the president and his ego and what he wants to hear, and that's where you get that sort of loony screed about the Dow. The Dow is above 50,000. I mean, that's great. I've got a 401k, but you're the attorney general. I don't know what that has to do with your day-to-day job. I think a couple things, Joe. First of all, if you talk to lawyers who have worked at the Department of Justice, they will tell you that old saw about, being able to indict a ham sandwich may apply to random counties and states, does not apply in federal court. Right, so there is a much higher and more professional bar for indictments when you're going to court as a federal attorney, and that's one of the things that was always going to trip up the DOJ under Pam Bondi, and it will trip up if they insist, unless they can pull some rabbits out of hats, will trip up her successor. And I think the other thing that we may want to explore here, because of how central public relations are to the president and how he views the world, right? Media coverage. Even though Pam Bondi, as all cabinet officials do, are either doing what they're told, as long as they, unless they refuse, or they're doing what they think the principal wants them to do. I mean, this occurs even in normal cabinets. You go to work every day and you're thinking to yourself, what does the boss want? What are the principles that he set forward? So she's doing what she thinks he wants him to do, in addition to whatever it is he's asking her to do. But the president does not like mockery. And Pam Bondi was considerably and repeatedly mocked. And I just have to wonder if he did not like the media coverage, because it made, in a sense, a laughingstock of the things that he wanted out of her and out of the department. And because media coverage is so central to how he views the world and how he feels about himself, that could have had something to do with his decision to replace her.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Let's talk about some of those potential successors. President Trump said to be considering a number of candidates to replace Pam Bondi. EPA head Lee Zeldin being reported as a possible frontrunner for the nomination. He's a former congressman from New York and a close ally of the president. 4 people familiar with the matter tell MS Now several other names have been floated. Yes, Jeanine Pirro pitching herself for the position. She's currently serving as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia after a long stretch at Fox News. Another name in the running, Republican Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri. He previously served as Attorney General in his home state. And Alina Habba, the former personal lawyer to President Trump, also been named as a possible successor. Last year, you remember, a judge disqualified her as a U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. Let's bring into the conversation MS Now senior legal reporter, former litigator Lisa Rubin, and MS Now justice and intelligence reporter Ken Delanian. Good morning to you both. Ken, first, just some of your reporting on on how Pam Bondi lost her job. We've kind of detailed it, but as you've been saying and reporting over the last day or so, it wasn't Pam Bondi's unwillingness to run all the errands that Donald Trump asked her to run. It was a legal system that thwarted her efforts, and Donald Trump is hoping that someone else might have better luck in pursuing his personal goals at justice.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Willie. Not to say that Pam Bondi and her deputy Todd Blanche didn't try at times to curb Donald Trump's worst impulses along the lines of lawfare, as Joe is saying, but she certainly tried to deliver on what he wanted and was unable to because, as you guys have laid out, federal judges in some cases stood in the way. In the case of James Comey and Letitia James, dismissing those cases because the U.S. attorney was improperly appointed. And at other times, grand juries stood in the way. And in addition to the cases you guys mentioned, let's not forget the 6 members of Congress that Jeanine Pirro tried to indict in D.C. Because they instructed the members of the military that they weren't obligated to follow illegal orders. The grand jury refused to indict those people. There are investigations running into John Brennan and James Clapper, and there's a U.S. attorney in Miami investigating what they call the grand conspiracy theory, some notion that government officials have been conspiring against Donald Trump since the Russia investigation and that it went all the way through the Jack Smith investigations. So she certainly tried and was not able to deliver to the extent that Donald Trump wanted. And it's also true that her mishandling of the Epstein case paved the way for this because she lost support among the MAGA base and on Capitol Hill. And I think David Drucker made an astute point that her public persona was not something that was pleasing to Donald Trump. Her performance on the Hill and some of those hearings was shrill, and her performance at news conferences, she never seemed comfortable speaking to, for example, the DOJ press corps that I'm a member of. She didn't do the kind of off-the-record interactions that you would expect of an attorney general. She just was not comfortable. She seemed insecure. But you're right. I mean, the idea that some other figure, a Jeanine Pirro and Eric Schmidt, both of whom have been longtime prosecutors, or Lee Zeldin, who's never been a prosecutor, is going to somehow achieve a different result is a fantasy. But what they could do is things short of a grand jury and what the Justice Department is already doing, which is blanketing people with subpoenas, requiring them to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees to comply with those subpoenas on specious investigations that have no basis in fact. That's been going on, and it's likely to continue going on, whoever takes the next office. And last thing is, we should not let this, we should reflect a little bit on Pam Bondi's legacy. As John Meacham said, no attorney general in history, certainly in modern history, but perhaps in history, has turned the Justice Department essentially into the president's private law firm the way Pam Bondi did. Critics say she's done incalculable damage to the Justice Department. She drove out, by some counts, thousands of career attorneys. She decimated the National Security Division. There are things that get less attention, like, for example, the Antitrust Division right now is in turmoil, and antitrust cases are being decided on the basis of who is hiring the right politically connected lawyer who's getting paid $300,000 a month. So there's a lot of concern about that. She did away with the Foreign Influence Task Force, which is one of the first things she did. She stopped prosecuting companies under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So the legacy is vast. The Justice Department is not the same place it was when she stepped into it and took office. And we have 3 years left of the Trump administration where more kinds of things like this are going to be done at the DOJ.
And she effectively cleaned house of anyone who had anything to do with a prosecution or an investigation into President Trump. Lisa, we should note, though, that Pam Bondi still has a subpoena sitting on her desk from the House Oversight Committee to testify about the Epstein files. The House Oversight Committee said yesterday, yeah, we still want her to come. That's in less than 2 weeks from now, and sit and answer a lot of questions that she certainly did not answer in that big public hearing when she started talking about the Dow crossing 50,000. So how much of this was about the Epstein files, which is that slow, selective, heavily redacted release of the files that, frankly, were foundational and are foundational to so many in the MAGA base?
Well, let's go back to something that other folks have said this morning, Willie, if we can. Pam Bondi sort of made a mockery of herself, and in particular made a mockery of the Epstein Files Transparency Act process. But it was an own goal. And the reason it was an own goal is because Pam Bondi herself sort of worked up the MAGA base into a frenzy and a lather starting last February when she said she had the client list on her desk ready to review. She then directed and undertook a massive internal review involving FBI agents working round the clock to review the Epstein files all through last spring. And it was only in May of last year that public reporting indicates that she and Todd Blanche went to the president and basically said, hey, boss, your name's all over this stuff. And that's how we found ourselves with a memo unsigned by anyone in last July saying, look, we are not going to release anything more because we don't think there's anything else here on which we could predicate a responsible investigation. That obviously rang hollow with not only their base, but with people all over this country. One could argue that if Pam Bondi had not been so eager to take advantage of the conspiracy theories about the Epstein files, she wouldn't have found herself in a position where she had to comply with a congressional act in 30 days' time, which of course we know she didn't do. It's unknown how much of this has to do with the Epstein Files Transparency Act or the Epstein files more generally, Willie, but it was not a showing of competence by her. And more importantly, it wasn't a showing of any empathy by her. You guys were playing some images a few moments ago while Ken was talking, and one of them was Pam Bondi looking in the other direction while a phalanx of survivors is behind her, raising their hand to indicate that they had never been communicated with by the Department of Justice. And Pam Bondi never could bring herself to turn around and look them in the eyes. In addition to however many memes we can make about what she said about the Dow that day, that to me is a searing image of Pam Bondi's tenure at the Department of Justice, because it's not only one of serious incompetence with respect to revealing victims' personal information, it's that refusal to even look at the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and treat them like human beings, which is generally all any of them want. Their expectations are very low with respect to future prosecutions, for example. They just want an apology for how they've been treated, not only historically by the Justice Department across administrations, but by this particular Justice Department, which again and again has compromised their safety and privacy.
MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin and MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delanian. We thank you both so much for being with us this morning. Greatly appreciate it. You know, Willie, we had said some time back that the two defining, maybe it was after the Bondi hearing, that maybe two of the defining pictures of the first year of the Trump administration would be, one, Pam Bondi refusing to turn around and even acknowledge the existence of survivors of the most heinous things that Jeffrey Epstein and his cohorts did and committed on them. That picture, as well as a picture of Kristi Noem standing in front of men who were caged like animals with shaved heads and just in what looked like concentration camp style prisons. And it's interesting that those are two pictures that will linger for years and years and years to come. That will be a large part of their legacies, but also a large part of this White House's legacy in the first year, because those two pictures paint 1,000 words on the Epstein files and also on this mass deportation approach that has proven to be extraordinarily unpopular with the American people.
Yeah, I'm so glad Lisa brought up that image. That was the right word. It was searing, an infamous moment where she could not, the Attorney General of the United States, she didn't even have to say anything, couldn't be bothered to just turn around and acknowledge the presence of women who say as teenage girls they were raped on this island by rich and powerful men. It just added to the perception that this Justice Department was protecting rich and powerful men and not there to protect the victims. And you're right, the other thing they have in common is those two women no longer have their jobs. One perhaps in Pam Bondi for not going far enough in protecting the president, and one in Kristi Noem for being a distraction and embarrassing the president and leading a policy that led in part to the death of 2 people, 2 American citizens in the streets of the United States. Still ahead on Morning Joe, the latest on the war in Iran as the United States, Israel, and Tehran continue to trade strikes just this morning. Plus, we'll talk about President Trump's hold on the Republican Party ahead of the
thing. This was not part of what I wanted to do, but we've done it, I guess, through sheer force of personality. We have a regime change like nobody thought was possible. They said, "What do you mean you have regime change?" My friend, great show. I love this guy. He's so nice to me. Every time I watch, and I appreciate. You know, we're not supposed to be seduced that way, right? But I am. When somebody's nice to me, I love that person. Even if they're bad people, I couldn't care less. I'll fight to the end for them. So I appreciate it. But, you know, I mean, I want to see no nuclear weapon, but we also won regime change.
As President Trump admitting the quiet part out loud, a confession of sorts on this Good Friday. That was on Wednesday, though, at the White House during a lunch event with faith leaders, talking about how somebody says something nice about him, he's got to defend him, fight for him. Doesn't matter whether they're good or bad people or not. So, John Meacham, it's a bit of a strange segue to welcoming you on this Good Friday, but it's what we have. Quite different from Jesus, who told his disciples time and time again to love your enemies, to pray for those who persecute you, to take it as a sign that you're blessed in heaven when people persecute you for your beliefs and your faith in Jesus. Talk about, I know your favorite day on the church calendar was yesterday, which I need to explain to confused Baptists who thought yesterday was Thursday. Explain why Monday, Thursday is your favorite day, and talk about, for people who don't really understand, the significance of this day on the Christian calendar.
Right. So it's the great 3 days, great 4 days in Western Christianity. Yesterday, well, Palm Sunday was last Sunday. It commemorates Jesus' triumphal journey into Jerusalem for that last week, Passover week, probably the year 33 of the Common Era. The historical nature of this is really important because there are certain things we know or we can deduce happened. Maundy Thursday is the night that he institutes the Last Supper and issues the great commandment, do unto other, love one another as I have loved you, and the often commemorated in Christian circles by the washing of the feet. I think you saw the Pope was washing the feet of prisoners in Rome. It's the act of humility. It's the act of the counterintuitive act of a king bowing down to the weaker, the strong serving the weak, which is at the heart, at its best, of the Christian message. A deeply counterintuitive undertaking. In a world that is often shaped by brute force and by strength and by the appetites and ambitions, the will and the whim of the strong, Jesus of Nazareth said, no, that in fact the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And last night he says, do this in remembrance of me, the institution of what becomes the Eucharist that rekindles and brings back this moment of immense, almost unthinkable sacrificial love, which happens today, the sacrifice of a father, the sacrifice of a son by a father. Fascinating, too, that it was there was a hugely important political context to the historical events that unfolded in Jerusalem in this season. Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman governor, would not have gotten involved if it had been simply a religious dispute. There had to be political implications. Jerusalem was riven by political uncertainty. We know, for instance, one of my favorite elements here is in the Great Gospel, today when Pilate offers the crowd, he says, do you want Jesus of Nazareth or do you want Barabbas? And the gospel simply says Barabbas had been condemned for crimes during the insurrection. And what's so fascinating to me is that it doesn't say anything else. It's as if there was some insurrection, there was some violence, there was